Hey, what's up, everyone? We're going to continue on here with part two of this tutorial. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually import that model from part one. Uh, Actually, we're creating a brand new scene to import it. I'm using an actual new version of Unity 5.6. It's a beta. It's got a progressive render. I really, really like it. Uh, Once we've done that, we're going to go in, test, make sure that we're looking at the SketchUp model here. We want to turn on generate light maps. Now that's done, we go ahead and we hit apply. And next thing we do is drag it into the scene hierarchy. And here we have our model. And as you can see, it's got all of our texture maps. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting. Um, First, let's go and make sure that we have our color space set to linear. That's real important. Sometimes it gets reset, and that can really screw up your rendering. So I've had that happen in the past. Always check that out. So the next thing you want to do is also look at some of the other settings like quality and graphics. Make sure they're all right. Everything needs to be set at the very highest resolution as possible. These are, and so I'm happy about that. Now I'll go in and look at graphics again. Same, more of the same. It all looks pretty good. So now that we're done, I want to point out. Oh, actually, yeah, that's really it. What I like to do is point out some of the problems we're having. I'm sorry, we got to change the whole model to static so we can get lighting. So let's go ahead and set up the lighting real quick before I talk about the UV stuff. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're using deferred on the camera if we want to get our screen space reflections to work. And our lighting's going to work a little better. Let's go into our lighting tab. We want to make sure we set the ambient mode to baked. Then we'll go down and look at all this. We want to turn on ambient occlusion, make sure that's set on. We need to go to this thing that says enlighten. That's the old one. There's the beta one, progressive. That's the cool thing. Now watch how it just kind of reses in. Again, I'm not messing with these default settings much. I'll typically double all of these settings when I get ready to do the final render. But right now they're looking pretty good. I go to the light, actually to use it, set it to the very highest resolution. I'm going to keep it set at directional, not baked at this time. I've tried both. Directional seems to work pretty good. Baked takes a little longer, so I'm leaving it there. And I think it all looks pretty good. I'm going through, double checking, make sure everything's. Turn off the compressed light maps, and I think we're in pretty good shape. So um, one thing I'd like to point out as you're looking at this, as I'm going to zoom out here, let me add a quick uh, reflection probe, and the reflection probe is going to help with reflections inside this box. So as you know, we set that up by going into an orthographic mode and moving it roughly to the center of the box so we can get most of the reflections. We might, depending on what's in here, we could add even more probes, but for this particular project, we're just going to do one. Uh, Again, once we get in there, we have to set the boundaries. We do that by clicking that little icon over there in the reflection probe, that little three-legged icon. That helps us to position the box. Now we got the reflection probe in there, got everything. We're ready to start mapping stuff. So you'll notice that, look at the textures on this one. So that's the spherical map one, that's the cube map one. You'll see the spherical map one really didn't come in well at all. And when we later on, we're going to put some textures on there. Uh, uh, Hold on, let me let this. I'm going to duplicate a set of maps here so I don't use the same ones I did. 1 second. Yeah, so we'll just duplicate these real quick. It'll take a little time. I'm going to up the speed, the clip speed, so we can move a little quicker than normal. While this is happening, I will point out that, as I mentioned earlier, that UV spherical map really didn't work well for us over there. So that's why I don't use it. I'll only use that cubic projection if mostly on the SketchUp model. So I just added a ground texture, and I'm dragging and dropping different. Now these are all PBR textures I made that we're going to talk about how you make these textures. I'm going to talk first about what you need to make, and then I'll actually take you into a program, Photoshop, and another program, and show you how these are made very quickly. But right now, what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to turn on make this a very reflective surface. Notice that there's no reflections going on. So I need to add a component to the camera. It's called a post-processing behavior component. It's a brand new one. It works great with 5.6. Then you want to create the post-processing profile. You can put it anywhere, but once you've done that, you need to hook it up to that camera component. And you do that very simply by dragging it, select the camera and dragging it right in this little field right there, dropping it in, and now you've got all this stuff, and it's all fog, anti-aliasing, ambient occlusion. Look at the occlusion, ambient occlusion. See how you can adjust that. We're not going to mess with that right now. Great anti-aliasing, including temporal anti-aliasing. There's screen space reflections turns on, and you can see now we have good. There's also things like motion blur and bloom and some other great and color toning and all kinds of stuff. It's great. So that's something definitely you need to download. It's a free one from the asset store. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at these textures, and I want to talk a little bit about this as we go forward. So as you can see, we've got a very reflective surface. It doesn't have it's not paying attention to any kind of normals or anything else. It's just a pure, like you put a piece of glass on top of this cobblestone, right? Now I've added a different concrete shiny floor, and you'll see that it doesn't have, it's more reflective in just some areas, not all areas, right? And there's the surface. So there's two maps that can control that. It can either be the alpha channel of the specular, well, the RGB and alpha channel of the specular. I'm going to turn this normal down to 0, so you can again see that it's still, even with a 0 normal map, you're still getting quite a nice, nice reflections. I should deselect that surface, but it's important to understand the relationship between these maps. If we look at this Albedo map, which is the typical color map, there's an alpha channel that you can have in that. So I'm going to look in this. If you notice that diffuse file right here, let's see, I need to go get the right one. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm looking at these. Most are PSDs. PSDs have an alpha channel. So I put one in the specular, one in the Albedo. I had to hook them up again because they had the old ones from the original texture file, and I don't want to mess with those. But I want to mess with these to kind of show you how things work. So if I look in this, the specular channel here, make sure I've got, yeah, let's open it up. So this is the specular PSD, and notice it's got a regular layer for the specular, and then it's got an alpha channel, which is a little brighter, right? So the first channel is a channel that explains the specular reflectivity. So the RGB is a specular activity. Here's the diffuse model, and this has got an alpha channel, and that alpha channel right there is actually talks about the roughness or glossiness of the smoothness, right? So we've got two different things. We've got a specular and a smoothness that we're trying to control with these maps. So, in fact, if you notice, there you go. Let me open this. This is on the Unity site. This is the shader calibration scene for specular value charts. Notice that we're not using the metallic workflow here. We are using all specular workflow. I'll talk a little bit about metallic here in just a second, but right now notice that the RGB basically is the color or the texture map of the thing, and the specular colors for non-metals. Notice that they're in dark grays, right? So you shouldn't have anything much brighter than that in the specular part, but in the smoothness you can have something very bright so that's why the alpha channel reflects the smoothness. Remember that. Alpha channel is the smoothness, whereas the specular map is the actual specular color of it. So you can use specular, you can use an alpha channel in the RGB, or you can use it in the Albedo, or you can use it actually in the specular. Now here's the metallic version. It's quite a bit more complicated, and if you want to build a system to use the metallic workflow, there can be some complications because there's a lot of different channels that you're messing with. It's It's a lot more complex. I'm not going to go over it in this particular lesson. I'll probably do it later. So anyway, those are important things to understand. That there's alpha channels you can use either in the albedo or the specular. They don't have to be both, but you can have one or the other. And those alpha channels will control the smoothness. And that smoothness is what's going to give you some really nice reflections, broken up reflections on the surface. Now I'm gonna bump up here some normal maps, and you're going to look in the shadows here. You can see that as this thing renders out, you can see how the reflections kind of get broken up in there, which is kind of nice. Let me add this to. Notice when I add the same material, the spherically mapped one from SketchUp really just doesn't work at all, and that's why you really just don't want to use spherical maps. Now here I'm going to talk a little bit now about secondary maps. Secondary maps are pretty darn interesting, it turns out. And if you're trying to create a realistic texture, it's pretty much something you have to do. So right now I'm using the tiling feature to basically look at the sphere. I'm adjusting the tiling on it. But notice I'm really cranking it up 20, and it's not moving much. Why is that? Well, that's because I've got this secondary map. So I'm going to go ahead and move those up to 20. Now all of a sudden it's starting to change. It's starting to change, and it looks pretty good actually. So let's back the top one back to 5, and we're going to leave the close one at 20 or a little higher. We're not going to leave it at 20, but you get an idea that as we start doing this, now we're starting to see. Look at those highlights. Look how nice they're breaking up. How they're reflecting. There's parts of it that are reflective. There's more the parts that are pitted are not as reflected. Look how nice how when we get close to it. So these secondary maps are great for getting close to surfaces. In fact, that's really what they're there for. When you get really up on tight, look how nice that texture stays when you're very close to it. So those secondary maps are just real important for that. So if I turn them off, look what happens. No secondary maps. Now this has still got the same albedo. Everything else is the same, but I've turned these off. I'm going to set this tiling now to something even more coarse so I can see if it gets any better. But you can see there's some nice reflections from a distance, but it doesn't get much better. And as I start jacking up with the tiling, you can start to see there's more tiling artifacts. So that's a problem also that you got to be careful of. So once I've got that done, let's go ahead and take this diffuse channel. Let's take a look at that again. Oops, got the wrong one. I'm gonna grab that in here. That's the diffuse channel. That's the actual normal channel. So those are just basic concrete texture maps. And once I've added those in there, and I set the tiling to something a little bit, typically you set it to something a little more natural scale, like a 1:1, or it's definitely don't want to be as high. You don't want to set it up as high as you do, as you do the actual original maps, right? So it makes for a great, really good look, right? So notice here I'm basically using the albedo alpha now on this thing, and I've jacked it up to 1. Oh no, what I did is I added the ping. Ping doesn't have an alpha, so when I added that ping diffuse, that there's a specular and has an alpha. When I added the albedo and it was just a ping, not a PSD, it turned it into glass, and that's not what we want, right? So here I am again. I'm just adjusting. But look in the shadows. Look how nice those reflections are in the shadows, or all the reflectivity of those surfaces. Works out pretty darn good, I'd say. So by the way, the progressive render is beautiful, don't you think? It looks just great. I have to say, I'm really pleased with how that works. So, okay, so now that we're done, let's go ahead, put that back and get that back so that we have the PSD in the albedo. And the next thing that we're going to do here is let's look at the let's lower back some gold. And I think what we'll do is I'm going to show you this new glass material that I kind of discovered. I kind of built, I played around and came up with what I think is a pretty darn good glass material that you can build right in the inspector. So let's pull in a cube from Unity, and we'll grab that cube, and let's just resize it really quickly, get it to a place, a size that we like. I'm going to pause here while I get that done. Yeah, so now we're almost done. Move it into place. Once we get it done, let's go ahead and apply this glass PBR texture we have right down here. So I'm going to drag and drop it. And you can see when we click off of it, pretty good piece of glass. It's the thickness, everything's got a nice reflectivity to it. It's not, I mean, as you probably know, PBRs have a hard time at glass, but this, as far as glass goes, this one's not a bad one. So let's take a look at what we've got here. First of all, this is not the right surface. Let's get the right, there it is, glass. Okay, so first of all, we're using the standard shader, so that's the metallic workflow. We're using albedo of white. Now, if you change the color, you'll change the color of the tint of glass. Going black just makes it more transparent. It doesn't really darken it. So let's look at the metallic. I've got it about 0.367, somewhere in there. Mid threes, little almost 0.4. And the soft smoothness is 1. Oh, the thing, hold on 1 second. Okay, something I forgot to tell you about the glass. Is a couple things I need to point out real quick. One is that, as I mentioned, we're in metallic mode, but this albedo setting right here, the alpha needs to be set to 1. This is actually how transparent that glass is. If I move this, if I move this slider around, you see it gets less and less transparent. I use 1. Seems to do the trick. It's a good number, and that's important. The other thing that's real important is this reflection. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, coming off of a cold. These reflections, as you can see, it doesn't work very well if you don't turn these on. So that's going to give you a little better reflection map and everything. The other thing I want to point out is this particular gold texture. Let me go get it for you real quick. There, let's lock it down. So as you can see, as you get close to it, oops, it's got scratches on it and kind of an interesting, dirty kind of a gold texture. So the way this is done, one is there's a normal map here, which is this scratches normal map. But the real key to this is this Albedo map, right? So this has got scratches on the gold, and then it's also got an alpha channel also, and it's got scratches on it too. Now remember, white in the metallic workflow means metal, so that means these are non-metallic scratches. So you're scratching through the metal into something else, and then I'm just duplicating them in here. So that's how that was actually built. And the other key part here is this occlusion map. Occlusion map actually, is basically, it's a kind of a map. What it does is it just puts, the white is transparent, the dark is dark. It's going to put a little bit of dirt and grime on there. I can put anything on this map I want. I just baked in an occlusion map on one of the original textures and put it on there. So that gives us, this kind of surface, this kind of dirty gold surface. So let's look at something else. Here's a dirt texture I built from just a photograph of some dirt, actually. Here's a ground one. This is a good example of one that's not scaled properly. So let's take a look at it. Let's go into the ground grass texture. Again, it's a texture map of grass. And what I've done here is changing the tiling, so now you can start to see that it works a little better. Now, one of the things that you'll see is that when we get a right scale that doesn't have too many tiling artifacts, you do see that when you're up close, you still don't see it as well. You don't get as much detail. So again, I'm going to basically use the exact same texture, this grass diffuse right here. I'm going to use that in my secondary albedo map, and I'm going to add the same normal in the normal map, and it richens it up quite a bit, but it also it removes a lot of the tiling artifacts, and it gives me a little better look as I get in there. I think I'd have to tweak these colors so that it wasn't quite so green, but I think you're getting the point of how all that works. I'm going to remove the height map. I've been adding height maps to things, but I don't think it actually creates some rendering artifacts up close, so I've started realizing that I need to remove those. So you can see that's what that is. Let's kind of keep on moving. Yeah, so let's go ahead and just fill out some of the other textures. I'm going to speed this up. Really, I'm just dragging and dropping textures onto different objects, adjusting the scales. As I do that, here I am still messing with the grass a little bit. And I'm going to add some more textures here in just a second. One of the things that we're seeing is that the baking, is happening pretty fast. And I have to say I'm pretty impressed with this new progressive render, because you can really get a feel for what it is that you're looking at long before. Look at these textures as you get up close. Look how good they are. They're great. I mean, they're just a wonderful thing. And in the next video I'm gonna show you how to make these textures, right? So I've got a workflow that I'm gonna talk about, and hopefully here we're adding the last concrete textures at the top up here, adjusting some of the specular stuff. Again, we get some really nice kind of reflecting areas in there. I think I'm using the concrete twice in that particular object. So you can see as we move forward that's really about it. So next video we're going to talk about how we do all this. So stay tuned.